here to represent our individual schools.
So this is what Alice.
So let's just park it on something, because I think we'll all have something on this and something to say, but there's a position either way. Okay. Item A4, minutes of the meeting held on 6th of November 2023. Any points on the minutes? No. Okay. So is it your wish that for them to be signed as a correct record? Yeah, fantastic. Okay. Right, we now get to the main body of the meeting. Now, there are quite a number of things here that could be a quite significant discussion this evening across, I think, 2 agenda items. Can I ask that we stick to hands up, run it through me as the chair? It's very easy to just go straight to Anita or straight to Julie or to Ian for answers, but I think we need to wait turns because people have specific points that they'd like to make on things. Christy, do you have something?
Yeah, it's just what I was going to put my hand up for earlier. I mean, I'm assuming that we're not going to be in the business of looking at how individual schools accumulated their deficits, because that's not a discussion for this meeting, is it?
Let's get to item 8 before we. Let's hear the presentation.
Yeah. As you said, we leave our school outside the door and we're here to represent everybody else.
Precisely. Okay, so the first item is school place planning projections. There's a supplementary sheet of actions on this one that has been recirculated after some meetings with officers. I think Ian is going to pick this one up, and then Wendy has put together quite a comprehensive pack for the forum to read. Wendy's not going to go through the whole pack. She's going to pick out the salient points that we all need to be aware of. So, Ian, I will see you there.
Thank you. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, everybody. I'll be brief and really give some context to what is our annual report for school place planning. It coming here to Schools Forum, which is obviously a key part of our discussion. It has already been to our Education Partnership Board, which is chaired by Sarah Newman, Executive Director. That was actually a really helpful discussion to look at the latest projections, the spare capacity as it stood then back in the autumn, and indeed some of the feedback, and some of you are members of that board as well, helps us to craft this paper. And as Andrew said, we've done some work on recommendations. We've actually revised those recommendations based on further feedback, and they're on your desk today. And we welcome your thoughts on them in terms of next steps. Probably worth saying, since we went to the Education Partnership Board, new data in the natural course of things has come to light, which is the October census data, and that is in the report itself. What I should say is we're already signed up, I think, Wendy, to be secondary heads this week, deputy to primary heads, whether that's through consultative or through heads briefing, a decision for primary heads. And we'll also be talking to chairs of governors as well, just so you get a sense of the cycle of briefing and consultation on these projections. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Wendy. Wendy observes she doesn't have a nameplate, but I said every name she Wendy anyway. So Wendy, over to you.
I don't need a nameplate. Thanks, Ian. So I'm not, as Ian said, I'm not going to take you through the whole PowerPoint. I'm just going to pick out the key points and then obviously open to any questions. So as you know, I produce this report annually along with my colleagues in the business intelligence team. The data source for this report is the May spring census. So just so you're aware of that, I will mention the October census as we move on in the report. The projections are carried out with the GLA. That we subscribe to the GLA along with all other London boroughs. But we also have our own internal method that we use, almost like a checklist, really. So whatever the GLA produce, we then produce our own method and then compare it to make sure it isn't, it's never accurate, but it's on a similar trajectory. And also there's the local intelligence that I apply to this from the job that I do on the ground in admissions, where I see all the trends and things moving. So there's a lot of it's coming from different angles to get to where we are in this report. think the first point of the report, I think it's always good to just sort of set the overall picture. You'll all be aware that Kensington and Chelsea, along with Westminster, has a high proportion of children that are resident that go to independent schools. I think it's always good to see that those figures in here for primary and secondary, which are quite high, because we there. If you can imagine, if all those children were going to state schools, we would have having a very different conversation now. But I think what's really interesting is if you have a look at the amount of years this is going back, it's sort of stayed quite stable. You don't see a drop off in the same way that you are for state schools. So these families are already, they've made their minds up. They're going to go to independent school probably before the children are even thought of. So moving on to the overall picture for the Kensington and Chelsea, it has the surplus capacity has gone up slightly since last year. So we're looking at 16.5 across the borough. This is broken down by planning area, and in Kensington and Chelsea, there's 2 planning areas. And when I say planning area, this isn't an area that I've decided this is what the DfE work with when we do our school capacity return, which is a statutory return that we send to the DfE every year. So it's split by 2 areas. Even though it's split by 2 areas, I don't look at the borderline and then just look at what's going on here and what's going on here. We obviously look at the whole borough because children in the north go to schools in the south and vice versa. But it's no surprise looking at the percentages that it's much higher in the north than it is in the south, and that has always been the case for as long as I've been around. And it's over 20% now in the north. Bearing in mind that when we move on to the proposed plan reductions that are going on, they're not accounted for in that percentage there. That's as it is now at May spring census. And then we have 11% in the south. So moving on to the capacity, I think this is probably one of the interesting slides. So you've got this slide here. So what we've tried to show there is the surplus capacity and the trajectory as it's going nationally in London, and also the GLA projections. So if you have a look at the blue line, which is the GLA projections up until 2025, if we were not to take out the plans that have already been proposed or already happened, we'd be looking at an estimate 24% surplus by 2025. The green line is showing you what it actually looks like with the removal of capacity that has been proposed and that's been approved. So by 2025, it will estimated, bear in mind this is an art, not a science, 18.9%. So even if it's 18.9%, if we have a look at what it is today at 16.5, it's still going up. But what we are doing is we're bucking the trend and we're controlling it, we're stabilising it. So that is a positive thing. We're stabilising the surplus. But I think the message in this is there probably needs to be more. There's more to be done. So that's quite an interesting slide. I think if you have a look at the bar graph, not so much this one here, when you have a look at the Westminster primary school population. Kensington, sorry. Sorry, two hats in the same day. Yeah, exactly. It's actually the same picture for them as well, which is interesting.
It is.
Even though we're seeing the capacity go down, the actual trends of children, Kensington and Chelsea residents going to primary schools in Kensington and Chelsea is very stable, and from other boroughs coming in, we're not seeing a huge contrast, which is a very similar picture to secondary. So moving on to, so the recommendations and actions today, which is reflected in that green line, is obviously we had St Mary's Catholic School, which reduced to a 1 form entry from 2023. We have an approved reduction by half a form of entry, which is going to take effect at Oxford Gardens from September. And Art Brunel have just concluded their consultation to remove from a 2 form entry to a 1 form entry in 2025. I think the problem is that I think we all recognise is that these things take time. So when you're consulting on a plan reduction, if you were doing it now, or you would have done it now, it's not actually going to really be formalised till 2025. So it's like 18 months. And what's happening is the surplus is continuing to grow, and we're trying to catch up with that. So it's the time it takes to do all these legal processes that we have to take into account. So when it does come round to the next window of opportunity for consultation, I like to have those conversations with schools early, so that they can then have conversations with their governors, diocese, and and the whoever needs to be involved in that. So the next window will be October this year for 2026. So moving on to secondary. Moving on to secondary, got a slightly different picture here. Even though we are seeing the same trend with a drop-off in numbers, I think it's important to say that the scale on this one makes it look worse than what it is, because it looks like it's really dropping. But if you actually look at the numbers, it's not as stark as the primary. It's just to show that it's actually there and it's going on. So the primary is actually, we would imagine it will start moving through to secondary. But when you look at the graph, again, this table, there isn't really a lot of difference between the number of Kensington residents going to Kensington schools and the out boroughs going into Kensington schools. And there's a real split there. So Kensington and Chelsea schools have a high proportion of out-of-borough applicants. And that, I think, is what makes the difference to the overall picture of the secondary. So what I did to try and give a similar picture to primary, I looked at the roll numbers, which we will have by 2025, taking into account the expansion at All Saints and the expansion at Kensington Aldridge. So those extra places. I looked at the projected roll number for 2025 and worked out what the estimated surplus will be. And I think I've put it there.
Is it worth
about 4.5%?
maybe dipping back into the introductory report? You've got a bit more information about secondary there, haven't you? Also, you've got the October census.
Yeah. So when you look at the October census, I'll go back to primary. And I think what's interesting as well, when you look at the October census for primary, it's 18.2. So it's up compared to spring census, but we had the same trend last year when we had October census, and that is probably due to the drop off during the summer, where you have children dropping off roll in the summer. So exactly the same thing. I know I'm comparing, but just showing the same thing happened in Westminster. It went up slightly, the surplus, then it drops back off again. So that's what the October census looks like at the moment. And with secondary, I think what I'm trying to show in that table there is that we do, if you have a look at the numbers actually on roll of secondary schools compared to the available number of places, we're actually in a deficit. But what I've also shown is the actual surplus when you remove the excess pan for the schools that are over numbers, because obviously All Saints is over numbers due to bulge classes in preparation for the expansion, and so are Kensington Aldridge. And also schools take extra children to accommodate girls because we've got a problem with placing girls. And fair access, obviously, it doesn't matter if you're a pan, for fair access, it's to ensure that there's an even spread across schools for any children that are considered hard to place. So it's just showing you their reality deficit, but overall there's a slight surplus of just over 1%, which is it's not a lot. So if we're looking at a 4% surplus in a few years' time, that's a good surplus to have. But it would be good to see it across evenly spread across schools and not just contained in any one particular school.
It's worth just saying, Wendy, sorry to interrupt, that the online version of this paper, Luke, has been updated. So it does show that extra column and shows the actual numbers on roll in secondary schools, where those numbers are higher than their published admission number. You've got that one there.
Sorry, I thought everybody had that one.
And obviously for secondary colleagues, we can obviously have that discussion in more detail on Wednesday's meeting. Yeah.
Just to add, included in the PowerPoint this year as part of the projections is education, health and care plan SEND. And the reason why we've included that is two reasons really. Firstly, the annual SCAP return, which is the school capacity return that goes to DfE, has now included SEND as part of the process. So that's a statutory return that we have to send to them in addition to all the other data returns. And that is probably because SEND is becoming much bigger agenda item because the need for more places is very apparent. So that's another way the DfE are finding out exactly what space we have got and what space we do need. So included in that, Julie's, obviously I work closely with Julie to provide this information for this report. And it's also a good opportunity to, when we do free up capacity in schools, whether it be, obviously there's no amalgamations in Kensington and Chelsea, but if a large school that's reducing their plan, maybe have space that could be utilised for an SEN resource space or a satellite school. So it sort of works well with the school place planning. And also included in here is obviously Rackless's area. We have a bit about early years, just to give you some brief information. But I know Rackless will be talking about the sufficiency assessment separately. So yeah, there's a lot of information there. I'll run through quickly. So hopefully I've covered the main points.
And I think probably worth saying, obviously we're not looking to agree solutions or next steps necessarily today. We do have some revised recommendations, which essentially are around further consultations with the whole school system in KNC in order to bring a report back to forum next time. That's what we're proposing.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Ian. Alison.
Do we have any visibility at all on what would happen to the private sector? Like the answer may well be no. If a Labour government were to get in, and as they are now suggesting, put VAT on school fees and backdated it, do we have any idea what those who could just afford private education, would perhaps drop out into the state system?
The technical assessment for me would be negligible.
Right. Yeah. Okay, that's interesting.
Sorry, backdate it.
Yes, that was
They can't backdate.
They can't backdate.
You can't.
You can't backdate as
The
well.
proposal.
So do you think it would be negligible anyway?
I agree.
That will be our sense. I mean, when Neil says it's an art, not a science, we're happy to be proved wrong.
Yeah.
This is why we come to you annually with the projections and the capacity. But obviously, it's one of those local factors.
Yes.
If there is a change, we'll need to bear it in mind and factor it in next time round.
And again, the local intelligence for me is I would see if there was a huge amount of families suddenly wanting to apply for state schools from the independent sector. It would be flagged to me and I think, well, hang on a minute, we had 100 applications last week. What's going on? So the intelligence is there if that did happen, but I agree with him, it's probably negligible.
I would imagine if it creates spaces for children that leave because they can't afford it, their parents can't afford it anymore, that the other parents that can afford it now, but their children didn't get in, would now take those places instead in this borough.
Okay, thanks. Alison, any other questions, Amanda?
Yeah, on page 13, you listed, or according to the Oxford Census data, schools and their surplus capacity. Without naming these schools, there are obviously 4 schools that have got significant capacities. two of whom have been addressed. So one is that has two have been approved, haven't they, changes? And there are two that we haven't got any discussion about it in the paper, and I just wondered, are they going out to consultation? Has that been discussed at all, or?
Okay, Wendy. So Wendy would have reported that if indeed the governors had decided to make to consult on reducing their pan. I mean, I know Anita would say, and we're talking about projections and capacity rather than, the impact on the school budget. That's actually the overall numbers that are key, perhaps rather than the surplus capacity against the published admission number. Because if the school is able to deliver a balanced budget, and they may have temporary caps in place, so there may be a school here that actually effectively is running as a one form entry, but officially their published admission number is 1.5 form. That gives you that high.
But well, it's just previously when we've had papers like this, you've talked about temporary caps, but there's no mention of anything like that.
Yeah, because as Wendy said, these are all kind of formal projections or returns to the DfE. They don't recognise temporary caps, but we're able to say to you there are local arrangements with some schools on this list in place. So they have staffed themselves.
It's difficult having any discussion about future strategy if we don't understand what's actually going on.
This is the published position. This is the correct position. We can say to you, of course, we're talking to those schools, particularly where there might be an impact on their budget, on curriculum, or on standards. We can say a little bit more later in terms of Anita's data around schools in deficit or likely to be in deficit and the support that they're getting from us, but where their local authority maintain.
Yeah, we had Chris first, I think, and then.
I think, Ian, you've already addressed in relation to the impact of the Labour government coming in and going ahead with that backdated that thing. But I was just thinking that wearing another hat, I know there's huge concern in that sector about how they are going to deal with that. So but I think you've addressed it. We'll wait and see. As it might not happen, and I'll deal with it if it does.
Indeed, Chris, and I hope the data we've shared with you tonight, the very latest surplus shows that if there were a surge in secondary, it'd be a different issue. But if there were a surge in primary, we have the capacity to deal with an acceptable level of surge. But we'll keep you all updated if these things were to change.
But sorry, given that we haven't got as much information perhaps as we can, what I'm not understanding is why the agenda items then have been changed. If we're not going to have any working group to consider these things, what's the sort of strategy? How are we taking this forward?
Well, we're taking it forward based on the re-amended recommendations. I think the view that officers had and that was discussed was effectively reconstituting an ISOS group is not going to change the position.
It should just be done.
And it's not going to change the lines of decision making on this. And if anything, it would potentially make the processes around any future decisions regarding role reductions or gapping forms of entry, it would delay them effectively, because principally it's for officers and it's for the likes of Ian and Wendy to have discussions with boards of governors based on what the numbers are. And we've been through that process already. We commissioned a report, and the conclusions of the report were your numbers are dropping, you need to reduce some forms of entry. The conclusions are the same, really. So I think a working party would not really add anything to that debate, I don't think. But which is what Ian and team looked at. Unless there's a disagreement that a working party would change.
I just would be interested to know why you think, and I'm not arguing that I think it's a good thing necessarily, I just don't see why it's different now to how it was different
Because
then,
it was
why we
novel
thought-
back then.
Ah, okay.
We were dealing with a novel issue that,
Fine.
whereas we're moving into an environment where we have the experience of, as a forum, being in these waters before, but this is something where I think every London borough is now moving into. And actually, boroughs in pretty much every suburban area from about 2026, 27 onwards are going to have these kinds of issues. So I think we know what actions need to be taken, and it's about allowing officers to get on with that and then come back and be reporting exactly what their discussions are. David, I think you've been waiting for ages.
No, I haven't. I will barge in. There's two things there actually. One is that I think we on the previous process, we were considering that it was levelling off, but it's now clearly not. I don't know whether that's important or not, but we're working on the basis that there's some progress to levelling off. The other thing, this might be a little bit contentious, any working party is going to be for people sitting around this table. So then given that it has come back to this group for discussion, it might be more sensible to actually just have an extended meeting of this group to actually pick up on any of the detail once the officers have actually done the detailed work.
And I think, yeah, we're really happy as officers, you know, to offer advice to Forum and I guess to all schools. But the approach that's set out here is with the recommendations is to talk to all primary heads, and primary heads exec initially, onto all primary heads, whether through heads briefing, consulting, seek views about next steps and an approach. You know, we do have an approach that Forum adopted 3 years ago now, based on the ISOS report recommendations to seek to reduce ports of entry. That work has happened. Actually, the recommendation of ISOS has been exceeded. It was 1 to 2 forms of entry, 2.5 ports have been removed, to support schools more closely around their financial monitoring. You know, there's additional resource in their NETAs team through Estera. Right, my take on it would be that we are more closely involved in working with schools, helping them with their projections. So, and then the third one was maximise pupil numbers, which, you know, maybe from the independent school sector, as I've said, I think the amount of effort we put in there, it's negligible. So really the question to all primary heads, to secondary heads on Wednesday, to chairs of governors later this term is, do we continue with that approach, working on what's effectively a school-led system where governing bodies make those decisions with advice and support, working with their responsible bodies, whether it's DLA, one of the 2 dioceses or the Academy Trust, or does the sector recommend a change? And if they do, that will come back to Forum next time for decision.
Yeah, Amanda.
Sorry, the only value as I saw it that ISOS had, and I think somebody else wanted to fill this role, is at a certain point they made their recommendations and they said, we need to reduce by 2 forms or 3 forms, 2.5 forms, whatever. Somebody at some point has actually got to say that, haven't they? So that when you then go to these groups.
Yeah. I mean, what I'd say to that, Amanda, is from my perspective, having lived through this and we lived through it, was that the local authority, and no offence to you, but spent a lot of money on ISOS. I'm not being funny. We could have arrived at exactly the same conclusion. And the conclusion could have been arrived at 15 times quicker and have not gone through the pain of having working party groups in which I think some primary schools potentially felt a guillotine over their heads that Forum were going to make a decision about the future of their school, which was never in the gift of anyone. So we do not have any jurisdiction to tell schools to reduce form entry. So I think for now, I think more detail, because this is new data, they need to do some, the local authority, I think, and maybe this is Ian's plan to look at what the impact might be from the learning advice, or some essentially how many forms might need to be reduced over the next 4 to 5 years, and then come back, as Ian said, with what that might look like.
Is it in our gift to make a recommendation to reduce by 2 forms? Is that within
I don't
schools?
think we have to, but we can note that this is
necessary.
desirable. You've got the words.
Because otherwise, the EPB forum, everybody, we just went round and round and round and round.
Yeah, and I think we don't want to stop that now. We want to just allow officers with their experience and dealing with this to get on. Jagdeep.
I'd like to note firstly, and thank you for reducing the FTE by 2.5 forms. It's good that you've done that. I used to sit on the admissions board, so I used to say in that group all the time that 5 to 10% of capacity is comfortable, and it's what we need to have in terms of place planning. That still stands up as you just now.
Yeah, I mean, it's not written in legislation anywhere, but I think it was a figure that was mentioned years ago by the DFB. But I mean, 5% I think is too low for us as a London borough. I think 10% is comfortable for this borough. Yeah,
And obviously we're way over that. So
yeah,
and when looking at the figures, we've got in 2018 we had 428 children start reception in the north, but we're projected to have 372, which is a reduction of 56 children, 2 forms of entry. Obviously, we've achieved some of that But what makes that complicates that is that during that period, there has been an expansion of numbers during that time. So we've actually got probably many more school supply than we actually need. And then in the south of the borough, the actual reduction is greater than the north. It's actually 4 forms of entry, isn't it? It goes from 525 to 405. And I'm just wondering whether the issue, I mean, as heads, we always think the issue was only in the north. And I think looking at the figures of the schools and looking at where we're at, there's clearly now an issue in parts of the south. We might, I think when we come, whenever whatever that strategy looks like, when those conversations, we need to have those in the south as well now, unfortunately.
Well, indeed, I think that's the intention, if I may, Alison, to go to all heads to seek those views, because there are 2 elements, aren't there? There's an overall approach. Do we continue with the current approach to seek to reduce forms of entry, make recommendations, but then individual schools, and as you say, this may happen in time, in small schools in the south as well, that there may be real budget challenges, and it may well be that you say, well, actually, job done, further 2 forms of entry should be removed. They are removed. We think, well, actually, schools have asked our recommendation, but there may be some individual schools that set out in the NETA's paper later on, who, irrespective of removing a couple of forms of entry, if that's what's agreed in 2 years' time, may face real budget issues. And that involves an individual conversation with that school, with the head, but with the governing body to say, what changes are you going to make, in order to remain viable? Because you're right, Jackie, there are some potential challenges in the future there. We're not seeing any of those immediate challenges now, but it's good to have that conversation. And also, the recommendations that will come back when we've spoken to you all will also include recommendations about supporting small schools who are likely to be more adversely affected by a falling run.
Because I mean, I work out we need 14 classes in the north, 15 in the south. Sounds pretty more complicated than that.
Yeah, and obviously we're factoring in parental choice, access to a local school, quality of education, the facilities, the fact that some schools, which is brilliant in terms of our local offer for parents of children with SEN, have a new resource space that they didn't have, or they've got an expanded resource space, or they're hosting a satellite of a special school, or I don't know, a hospital school in a new home. So all of these other factors are played into there being a bit more space in some primary schools than there used to be.
There's some housing going into Northern Kensington as well.
We're also trying to factor, I guess, we think impact negligible and long term, but we're also got our eye on that one.
We're all praying.
Yeah.
David.
So, Ian, I appreciate it's not easy. How are you going to, if on this occasion, how is it going to be different in terms of ensuring that all heads attend a meeting and they're exposed to page 13, which is very powerful. Yes. And no offence to Wendy, well done for all the documentation in terms of the PowerPoint, but really that's all you need in terms of primary places. And how are you going to encourage them to recognise what they need to recognise?
I mean, it's pretty worth saying when you've already had an approach from the chair of consultative, from Amy Callaghan, to say, can we have this October census data? We need this at next consultative meeting. And again, if appropriate, we've offered, Wendy's offered to attend. So we're really keen to work with you and your chair and vice chair to say, what information do you need? We can be part of the discussion. What do you want to bring back? We can also do that through heads exec data as well, if that's helpful.
And often these discussions will also involve the diocese. Just remember, it's not, there's other stakeholders involved as well as the governors, the LA diocese, where it affects the diocese.
And the other one I wanted to say, Andrew, was the I do disagree with you slightly. I think one of the things that the ISOS Working Party did very well, if you remember, they produced a rubric where they analysed not just falling roles, but they looked at academic success, they looked at financial stability, they looked at the fabric of the building in terms of its sustainability over, I think it was 7 years at that time and beyond. They looked at the sort of forecasting which schools might be able to sustain their sort of position in terms of reputation as well, which we didn't do. There were some, I think, things that they did very, very well. And I mean, I think to some degree, we also stopped them halfway through that process, because certainly in Camden, the Tower Hamlets, they continued, didn't they? They made actual recommendations working in partnership with admissions, so with the director. And certainly, Jack Deep and I have had a number of conversations. We both started out together in Camden, and they have been more bold, let's say, in regard to replicating on a grand scale what's already started here. So there's a more positive equilibrium in terms of the current state of play. I think that is probably the direction of travel here, isn't it? But as you say, it's going to take time.
Yeah, I think on that though, the LA can probably now do some of that work and those forecasts and projections based on some of those factors, based off the learning from ISOS. But the outcome was still the same. It was still that the schools that had the lowest admissions coming in and the lowest numbers, they're the ones that reduce their point of entry rather than anybody else.
Yes. Thank you.
Peter.
Just back on this VAT point, I would have some sort of fallback mechanisms, particularly at secondary level, because you know, £4,000 to £6,000 extra a year, 20 to 30,000. Is going to displace people, some children out of it. I'm pretty sure that it's a big enough change in the budgets or family budgets to do that. So I wouldn't not lie back, but I'd sit back and think that it's going to have no impact, because I suspect it probably will at the margin.
Yeah, that's if I may, and that's a really good point, Peter, and two things to say. A, based as Wendy said on the statutory returns we've made to DfE over the past, I think 13 years now, you know, they have allocated us some additional capital, basic need grants it's called, in order to provide additional places in secondary schools, obviously by agreement with secondary schools, you know, all of whom have been approached by me on 2 occasions now over the past 6 years. A couple of schools have agreed to expand. Obviously that doesn't happen overnight. You know, you find the contractor, you put the scheme together, and those works are, you know, still underway from the previous round of expansions, as Wendy alluded to, All Saints and also at KAA. There's no more money from government currently, based on our latest projections, to do further expansions. And I think also you'll appreciate, in terms of inner city size, I think the secretary heads in the room would say, well, yeah, where would this building work happen in? Where else would the children go? And when this isn't a new situation for Wendy's team. So every year on offer day we have unplaced residents, and Wendy's team will advise where the nearest secondary school is, probably out borough, that has spare places, and that is the way in which we fulfil our statutory duty.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Stephen.
Sorry, just to respond to that point, I do think that independent schools might do something to alleviate that pressure to keep their pupils. But my question is actually about your report on page 14, and it may be that because I've got the earlier version, I'm not seeing. Sure. But we've talked a lot about the falling numbers in primary school, and I assume that will feed through to secondary. The school capacity seems to be at a level where actually we can accommodate everyone up to 2027. So do we need the expansion, or is it actually because the published admission number is slower, and therefore we need to
Sorry, what one are you looking at?
So it says our school capacity is 4,902, and the charts for secondary places is sort of roughly the same.
That's what it actually is, this one here.
Okay, so add cohorts. So, but our future numbers go back to 4,900.
No, it's going to grow.
It's going to grow.
Yeah,
okay.
Because of the outer borough.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just my experience of that in secondary is that secondary schools continuing to be more and more popular.
Yeah.
Significantly popular in RPKC, and taking this year more for applications.
Just looking at it that long.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we absolutely need to be mindful of that, Stephen. Obviously, the day job of when you're in the teams, if you look at that chart, we've got one school with a small amount of surplus capacity, which is Holland Park School, almost all the schools have gone over numbers so that we can play senior admissions precedent. So we need a bit more capacity than we've got.
No, I see actually the published submission number is only 4,800, so actually it's more to do with that.
Yeah.
Carry on.
Just briefly to speak to your point, Peter, I think that there is capacity across the 5 borough at secondary. So it would be, as you say, it might be placing children out of borough. And the other thing is, I think the dynamics of the secondaries, 4 out of the 6 of us are faith schools. So actually, we'll continue to pull in right across London. Yeah, and that's quite unique.
Yes.
Yeah.
Point two.
I think if you think about the Afghan evacuee situation and the huge cohort that come in all in one go, and they're all accommodated. So I think that just demonstrates that how we can accommodate additional children that weren't planned for if we need to. And we're motivated.
Yeah.
In all sorts of ways.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Jackie. And then I think we kind of need to get on to the next.
You talked about the margins in the independent schools. There is a marginal reduction in the number of children going to independent schools in primary, and it is significant that those children are coming into state schools, but it's not making a difference.
Maybe stemming what otherwise might be a slight further decline.
Because one thing we've asked you loads of times, and you brought it to it's good to see it again.
Okay, brilliant, Wendy, and thank you so much for that. So Schools Forum asked to agree that the projections are taken up coming ahead. Teacher and chair government has made consideration feedback, particularly in relation to suggested approaches to reduce primary capacity further and support and advise schools in deficit. And secondly, to agree a report with recommendations for further action and be brought back to the next Schools Forum meeting once feedback has been received from head teachers and chairs of governors. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, Wendy.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, we move on to item A6, dedicated school branch monitoring, excessive balances and balance control mechanism. Anita is going to present this. We had a discussion, a hypothetical discussion last forum, if you remember. It started getting far too hypothetical. So we decided to ask Anita to go back and look at a proposal based on what the DFE are they requesting or demanding, Anita, that we have a mechanism.
Not demanding, but we know that in any discussions that we have about school funding and tightness of budgets and how much, the increase, just the overall increase of 1.7% per pupil this year makes it very hard to put any points across when they can say, but overall, your schools have got these level of balances, these excessive balances.
And it is in the guidance.
As well. It is in the guidance.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, page 105 in your packets at the back, in case you're happily reading the wrong report. Okay, Anita, over to you.
Yeah, I will. I'm going to touch on the other 2 parts of the report before going to the proposals around the balance control mechanism. So it has got the, as Andrew said, it's got about the DSG monitoring, and overall we're now forecasting an underspend of 606,000 on the high needs block, and that's mainly in relation to independent placements and costs being less than when we set the budget and previous forecast, and it does reflect the additional cost of the targeted support going up from £3,000 to £6,000 for Kensington residents that are using more than, for schools which are using more than 50% of their notional SEN funding. But overall, table in 4.1 is showing that by the end of this year, we expect the deficit on the DSG to be 5,665,000. Okay, then moving on to school balances. And that's in Appendix A, the current school balances, or balances at the end of March 2023. And that's showing that the overall school balances were 6,360,000, which was an increase from the previous year. We are seeing an increase in the number of schools going into deficit. So that's gone up from last year, and we think it will go. So it's gone up since 21-22, where we only had 1. Currently got 4, and we think that that will increase further at the end of this year based on the current forecast. So we have got that interesting, more schools going into deficit and then schools with large balances. So if I go on now to talk about the excessive, school balances control mechanism and options. Again, as Andrew said, we were asked to look at this by the forum, and we didn't want to bring options last time, so we're bringing back options. Well, we're bringing options here for the first time. So any of these options will be from the end of 2025-26. So they'll be based on the actual balances at the end of March 2026.
Sorry, they have to be, or you've chosen to?
Oh, not have to be. That's what we're saying. Trying to give, any change to give notice to. Yeah, no, don't have to be. And obviously, what the other thing that you'll see is that while each of those would have clawbacks, and I'll talk a little bit about the options, is there's also then the corresponding redistribution of those funds to all the schools. So actually, in a way, it does help some of the schools that have got financial difficulties. So we did seek, in order to come up with these proposals, we did seek information from a number of other boroughs, and we got information from 5 other boroughs, Lambeth, Ealing, Surrey, Manchester and Kent, in terms of their balance control mechanisms, and we sort of tried to draw from some of their mechanisms to come up with these 3 options. Option 1, and the impact of the options are all shown in Appendix B, based on current balances, not the balances, not what balances will be. Option 1 is using the DFE definition of excessive of 8% for, I say primary, I mean especially in nursery as well, and 5% for secondary. Option 2 is saying, let's count only those balances over 12% of school income, secondaries over 7.5%. And option 3 is 20% for primaries and specials, nurseries, and above 12.5% for secondary schools. All of the options are saying, if that figure that's then classed as excessive is less than 15,000, it's not worth doing an adjustment for that size. And then lastly, each option has an amount to the balance that would potentially be recovered and redistributed. Option 1, 50%, at 75%, option 2, 100%, option 3. As we're reducing the amount that we potentially brought back above a higher percentage, we would recover a higher proportion of that. Paragraph 6.8, we've said that where there is evidence of specific projects agreed by governing bodies, these will be taken account of, but is missing when calculating clawbacks. So what we mean there is, so if there's a significant contribution to a capital programme that has been planned for some time, so where there's evidence from governing body minutes that this is what the balance is for, we can certainly take account of that. So obviously there's going to be discussion here, but the other thing that we're proposing is that we bring one of the first steps, and which I think we absolutely have to do, whatever the outcome is today, is that we're designing a form in my team around to collect the evidence about what the planned use of the balances is, because we're not very clear on that. Even if schools are clear, we're not very clear on the information that we collect. So I think we'd go ahead and do that anyway. That'll be the right thing to do. Right, open questions? Yeah.
Right, okay, thank you, Anita. Just before we go into questions, there's a huge amount of this, and we could probably be here till the morning thrashing through variations. Anita, if you were to your hat on an option that you would recommend to the forum, based on what you're seeing in the balances, and I suppose the fact that we're going to go and negotiate with the DFE around SEN, around various different other things, we want to be able to demonstrate that we're fiscally responsible with regards to this. What would you recommend as a?
Well, I would say option 2 seems reasonably balanced in terms of the size of what we class as excessive and that it's 75% of the balances, but that's just my view.
Big clawback, of course.
I didn't
As a
exactly
whole.
didn't take it
As a whole.
That wasn't based on that.
Okay.
Okay, we'll go for questions. Amanda and then Peter.
Yeah, I've got a statement and a question. So my first statement is, given that I've only worked with very prudent schools who really do set great store by their 3-year budgets, and I know most of my colleagues around the table are the same, we work very, very hard to plan. I think it's inherently unfair if this takes effect before the end of that 3-year cycle. I think we should have right to plan properly for this and to prepare for that, unless we're told by the DfE we may not do that. So that's why I asked about whether we have to. I'm very concerned about the idea, and again, this goes to the 3-year timetable. I'm very concerned about the idea of that project looking back in minutes around projects, etc., because had any school who'd been prudently building up money wisely thought there was a possibility of clawback, they would have been building a set of evidence as it went along. So we absolutely have to have a period. Oh, I'm not a redraft.
But does it, you've got any budget to discuss that, I suppose?
Yeah, I've not
Yeah.
proposed to go back and look at historical minutes. It's just what you're saying for those year-end balances, what the plans are. I'm not saying
but
shows.
my concern is if you're providing evidence to go to the DfE, 1 year worth sort of rapidly put together project plannings for some schools to potentially spend millions, as I understand it. I'm concerned about that. Yeah.
I suppose the counter to that would be, what have schools been building budgets for in the first place? Building reserves for in the first place.
Each school will have its own view on that, won't
And
they?
I think that's what Anita's looking at collecting. What are the plans? Because I think the capital thing is quite interesting because of what Mariella said, for example, there's quite a lot of faith schools within our in the system that who aside from the academies that are faith schools that
Have to pay 10%.
have to pay 10%. They have to put more money into it, and there's only, for example, in the Catholic system, £13 million across 240 schools. So you have to provide revenues for.
No, exactly.
But not.
But it's not necessarily for a specific project. So, for example, take All Saints, we could have a list of 20 lovely things that we'd like. You never are guaranteed what ones will be approved. But if 2 or 3 of them were approved, you'd have to have the money for that. But actually, it may never be drawn on. So,
yeah, I think the point is collecting the information, finding out what the state of play in schools.
Yeah, but if we collect the information and then make decisions at that point, we could be in a very vulnerable state.
If I may, I think the question we want to ask through the balances formula and then to be able to say to the DfE is, we have sorted information from individual schools, asking them whether their balances are committed or not, and if they are committed, how they are committed in broad terms. And that's the evidence we're able to say to the DfE that we have collected in a systematic way, school by school. We would only do that if that's what's agreed at forum today. And what we're also looking at, I suppose, subsequently is, should schools, through that pro forma that we want to agree together, say, actually, of the £400,000, £200,000 isn't committed. I doubt they'll say that. But if they did, we would then say, well, we have a mechanism in place agreed by forum to claw back the non-committed part of the balance.
It's going to be a rush to spend the money, as it were. That's what really concerns me.
It's more about us, I suppose, having by agreement with you all, us having the evidence and being able to say to the DfE, we have the evidence to show that schools with larger balances have made commitments against those balances and that they've set it out over, I think it's very sensible, Amanda, what you said. It could be over a 3-year period. The form that's returned sets out how it might reduce to the recommended level.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Ian. I think that seems a reasonable suggestion, because nobody wants schools to just go rushing spending money, but there is the point around how we get our school budgets, what they're meant to be spent on, what they're meant to be spent on.
And what flexibility would be to change that going forward if some unforeseeable whatever happened, you know?
Yeah, but we're not in possession of that information, are we? We don't know what is committed, what isn't committed across our local authority. We've got Peter, Stephen, Sarah and David. Peter.
Can I just point out to the committee that, as I see it, across the plans, there seems to be this redistribution on these scenarios from secondary schools to primary schools. Just putting it across all, yeah. And am I right in thinking that the nursery schools have been ring fenced?
So because they're different pots of money.
They're different pots of money.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think we a further complication to the proposal is that it redistributes money from secondary to primary, which we may agree is fine, but I'd like, in the interest of transparency, to draw that out. The second thing that I would like to point, and I take the chair's point about everybody putting their own ideas up. I just think option 3, where you recover 100% of, the 20% of the primary, over 20% primary balances and 12.5% over secondary balances is confiscatory expropriation and the sort of thing that would happen in Leninist Russia.
Actually, it takes less money. It's less money instead.
Well, yeah, but it's the idea that schools by their own efforts cannot retain a bean of their surplus over a certain level. And I'd just like to make that point. I will broaden the argument out from a governorship school. But as I see it, there are huge differential as well in the amount, for instance, schools get from lettings. If you compare Fox to Avondale, for instance, within being very safe and being within my own federation now, Fox does very well on lettings because of its geographical location. Avondale doesn't do very well because of its geographical location and lack of public transport. I'm not quite sure, how you model this, but again, I put that on the table as a complication.
Yeah, it's a fair point. I think there is something in the secondary primary thing there. We're redistributing those funds, they come in through the DSG, in that the ARPU at the secondary level is almost a third higher per pupil. So it's win-win for the primary schools in that sense. That you're redistributing that volume of funds out.
Yeah,
but there's only 2 secondary schools
I think
in there.
that's right. That's right.
Or is it all to go to paying off our deficit?
No, it doesn't go to the deficit at all.
It can't.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose only if it was from a special school, then it would go back to the high needs block because there isn't a way to.
Okay, Sarah.
So I think St Clement has to declare an interest in all of this, that we have a big surplus this year. I just want to point a couple of things out about that. And one is just to say, I think that this proposal is really reasonable, actually. It gives due warning. For me, it seems quite fair. I think there are some different factors along with the ones that Amanda's mentioned there about why schools might have so much money. And it's not necessarily that they're saving it, they might have had a windfall for some reason. There are kind of different reasons why the money's appeared there. But I do think when you look at the rest of the evidence and the documents here, most of the schools look to me like they're going to use that money to keep themselves going for the next 3 years. So, I think at least there's some transparency here. So yeah, I'm fully supportive of what the officers are trying to do.
Stephen, I think I'm missing out that psychology.
So that was really going to be my point. I think for the primary schools, and it goes back to our earlier discussion, about pupil numbers in schools. So primary schools with falling goals are financially finding themselves in a more difficult position. 77% of the schools have in-year deficits. I don't know whether there's a plan for schools that continue to have in-year deficits until they deplete their resources. But of course, secondary schools have enjoyed being at full capacity or having surplus places, having bulge classes. So I think it is very different. I'm not going to comment on what's the right model because I don't know, to be honest with you. But I just am rather concerned that we're looking at two different areas, and this relates back to where we were before, primaries, falling goals and deficits.
I agree. Yeah. Amanda.
Legally, can I just check something? Going back to Peter's point, actually, would this actually attach to what we call governors fund? It's
No,
this
no.
exactly. So
Separate.
your fundraising is really.
I think Peter's point is that he might have, Avondale may not get the income from letting, so they
No,
will
sure.
rely on revenue.
No, absolutely. But at the same time, when we present our balances, our budgets, we should separate out our own raised funds, shouldn't we? Because the DFE is not doing or not.
You're not allowed to put lettings into separate funds.
Yeah, lettings is part of your like official school.
It's not true.
So it's
It's not true
VA
for
schools
for
are different.
VA schools, but
Not
not
for
for
VA
VA
schools.
Right, okay.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's what it's-
No, it's really unfair if this.
Lettings of buildings, contract schools, they're shared, but land that's let belongs to whoever owns the land. So that's generally the contract school.
So generally be,
The voluntary aid school that
Right.
exists, that it belongs
Full
to.
of faith school.
There's different rules for different schools that you need to go get advice really about that. So,
Okay, Chris.
There's just a couple of things I wanted to ask. I've looked at this and I agree with everything everybody has said, by the way, for a start. But actually, there's a principle here about sort of equitable spread of funds, and I understand that there's the argument of with financial management, less good financial management. That doesn't detract from the principle of actually making sure that this money goes to where it's needed. I think the principle of having a decent lead into this, so that actually where you have got 3-year plans, taking into account your reserves, and that you have the ability to refine that and to spend that. And you would expect to find evidence of that in governor's minutes anyway. I just wonder, I mean, I'm towards option 2, I think, but I just wonder why, and was this something that came out from looking at other authorities, why if 5% and 8% is the principle on which we work now, why would we move away from that? I don't have any strong feelings about it.
Well, 5% and 8% were quoted from the ESFA, which regulates academy funding.
Indeed.
So we use that as a guidance
Yeah.
towards what we should be doing in the maintained sector. Is that right, Anita?
Yes, and notwithstanding that option 2 does pull back more money, but it's giving a little bit. It would give a little bit more leeway, and certainly if we were starting this. So
Can I make a suggestion as a way forward, given some of the conversation that we've had? So it's clear that we need to decide something, because we need to really demonstrate to the DFE that we're fiscally responsible, given that we're trying to negotiate on various different levels with regard to like SEM and our deficit, etc., and going forward, how we're supporting schools. And also that we need to, I think we need to gather some of the information that we've talked about in relation to schools and committed funds. And that is that if we've got a year before we'll be looking, this would kick in. If we started with option 3, a bit like we do with the NFF, and we've moved gradually over a period of time, if we started with option 3, that we might find the committed funds show that in that first year there is very limited clawback, with a view then that as we review this as a forum, we start to get a little bit closer and need to present papers on, we move 15% closer to the ESFA guidance. It just gives us the year to get ready and a greater berth in terms of that redistribution clawback percentage in 26, 27.
But funnily enough, I take a completely different view to Peter here, because I think that is in a way the fair one. It gives you a bigger cushion to go to, but actually if you can't manage your affairs such that you have spent that, then it seems fairer that you use that. But to me, it's less complicated, shall we say.
So you
I-
want to go for
I like option 3 for some of the clarity. Sorry, I completely directed this supposed to be.
I think Jagdeep.
I'd agree with you. We have to go for an option, obviously, I'd agree that has to be great. But we just talked about the anomalies in school funding and how we can have money off balance, and we are very much, it's not a level playing field, and maintain schools have very different rules for them.
Yeah.
And one of the primary schools that gets caught up in this, I can understand why they've got a larger balance. They have a large balance because they're a large business, and that business benefits all of the primary schools. And it's not in our interests to shoot box.
Thank you.
Sorry, Jackie, that actually also occurs in the secondary schools. The secondary schools are using surpluses to support all the feeder schools or the schools in the area. So we'll just spend more.
What I'm saying is that actually, in at Coalville, we had fewer nursery children one year, and we didn't actually have we had a deficit as a result of that. And when you've got a large business alongside your primary school, then that can have a massive impact in a very short time, and that could happen to any school that is entrepreneurial. And one of the things that this borough used to value, and I'm sure it does still value, is schools doing that. And I don't think we want to create this intense incentive within what is already an unusual set of schools. It's what makes our schools brilliant.
But it is about each student having what they're entitled to.
Absolutely.
And so that must remain. There must be a balance, that they must have that money. Just because someone's an entrepreneur, that shouldn't mean that children at that school have more. I think there has to be more equality there.
But there's extra money that's been raised, and there's historic money that's been raised that hasn't been drawn from any children. It's surplus, and then the surpluses are built.
My point is that it's not about, it's about equality.
David.
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to add, but I don't disagree with much that I've heard, is simply about communication. So I mean, how this is communicated after tonight. We all go off into our respective groups, don't we? Is there a way of communicating this differently on this occasion? Because I could see some forums post tonight listening to this, it'd be like a room of squelch cats and misunderstanding.
I'm not going
Makes me
to
care to how it's
I think that's a really good point, and I think that's something that would make sense for Ian and Anita to go away and look at, because we could spend a long time looking at comms. I think we kind of need to try and move things. You like to say something?
And I was just going to pick up on that point, because we're all very different schools. We work within our ORPU, the age-weighted pupil unit, and we spend that on pupils, but we're also adding significant sums to the pupils in our schools and the pupils in our communities, because we're working with lots of other schools all the time. So I do get what you're saying, but actually I don't know how we move this forward. I'm with you really, but we need some way of communicating the problems. And just to come back to your 10%, actually, I don't know whether you're aware, but the ESFA doesn't provide grants for certain, or doesn't allow certain schools to apply for certain grants if their reserves are too high. It also does encourage you to put more in to get extra points so that your capital grants are successful. So you actually normally have to try and get 30%. So you're incentivized to raise money yourself from other sources to be able to do things for the benefit of our pupils. But at the other side of it, we're also told not to keep money to be able to apply for things. It's really quite difficult, and I don't know what the answer is.
I think you're right, Andrew. The communications depends on what recommendations are agreed or not agreed. And it may be, I'll just say this on the floor, that where it says in 7.1.3 agrees to an option 4, Form doesn't have to agree to an option tonight. The feedback can be the DFE the options are under active discussion, but the key recommendation to my mind, I think there's consensus for it, is that we work with you all on a form that is submitted annually. We'll seek some feedback on what should go into that form. And the first round of those returns actually influences, what we do next, and bring a report back to say, actually, 90% of the balances that are excess have shown to be committed, and we've asked further
But sorry,
questions. when
those
needed.
returns though,
Yes.
would look very different depending on when they're going to be actionable. That's why it's really important to agree the timeframes.
But I
1 year, 2 years, 3 years, it's radically different.
And we're not going to design the whole form this evening, but if the recommendation is that there should be such a form, and there's consensus and form that local authority maintained schools should return it, we can then take it from there and bring the report back.
On that, I think for heads and how heads work, they'll want to know what the direction of travel coming out of form is. And if we say there are 3 options, we don't know what one we're going to go for, but we want you to tell us what you're committing out. People, it looks like smoke and mirrors and skullduggery. I think what we need to go with is an option. We propose an option, but at the same time, we're gathering this data, and then we'll show heads and governors, based on what's being committed, what things could look like, and have updated data in the future. But it's got to happen fairly quickly.
Can I suggest that we go back to our groups and consult on option 3?
Well, I think we should recommend option 3.
And then we go.
Is my view,
I think.
and we take that back. But I think that we need to be careful not to take it back separately. I think this should come from principally from Ian and the sort of form, and for them to present it so that they can be clear to the secondary heads group, primary heads group, and both sets of governor groups.
I mean, given that, Andrew, is there not a mechanism whereby we can all commit this evening to not saying until something is
It's public, it's public.
Well, it is public. I think
filmed, isn't it? So,
Yeah.
I think we want to join us on this. I think we should try and move this on, because I don't think we're going to change too much with regard to the options, and the fact that we've got to go away and actually gather a huge amount of information and communicate it. So can I just get any nods for heads? Are people happy roughly with going out with option 3 as a start of the 10, whilst gathering the information?
When?
I like Ian's idea. Let's get a form and gather the information and see where we are.
I think head teachers will be concerned as to why you were taking this information and there's no proposal on the table.
It's softer, isn't it? There is a form already. You already.
That's to be agreed tonight, that we're happy to go out and
It's been too long since I've been in VA school, because there always used to be a form you had to fill out at the end of the year saying what we were doing with our service.
No, you do for the diocese, theoretically in their financials, but not for the local authority.
I've been most of the time confused. On the one hand, I agree with you that these should be, if we go for option 3, it makes sense. I don't understand why there then has to be a quick sweep towards the FSA recommendation.
No, there doesn't have to be.
Okay, so we could just stick.
We come back to it, but that's the option.
This could be the end base.
I think if we start hard line, I think it's harder to go the other way.
Yeah, I agree.
So we start as far away as possible. We give everyone the wriggle room, the year, and the furthest away
So
from
can
the
we say it starts in 3 years' time then? That's option
I
3.
don't think in the current circumstances we can say that.
No.
We're trying to negotiate the DFE on finance.
I think that's.
Is it worth working through the recommendations and see what Eddie's happy to agree to?
Okay. Let's go first. See where we're happy. Okay, so schools forum is asked to note the 2023-24 DSG allocation and forecasting spend of 606,000. Thank you. This will reduce DSG cumulative deficit from 6.2 million at the end of 22-23 to 5.7 million by the end of 23-24. Noted 7.12 to note potential increase in the number of schools with deficits. And that support will be provided to schools most at risk going into deficit, and that's been raised by Siemens tonight. 7.13 agreed to an option for the implementation of a balance control mechanism, including redistribution of funds from 25-26 And for the next version of the scheme financing schools to be updated prior to consultation with maintained schools.
So for clarity, Andrew, should that be agree to option 3?
Yes.
Is that what
That's what
the
I
slight tweak to
suggested.
this recommendation?
Wouldn't actually put it to a vote.
Of course,
Yes.
so hence, that's just a suggestion, but given.
But I think that
Your
we
discussion.
come back to this when it would have to be either the next forum or the one after, but hopefully the next forum is what date's the next forum?
March.
That's probably too.
It's probably a little bit soon because people will be working on financial year end and working out what their reserve position will be going into next year. So it'll be the summer forum
So it's
with
the
a
only,
view to,
yeah, we'll,
we don't have to agree exactly what we'll come back to, but that this agenda item, the options and where we've got to with committed balances.
I mean, it almost, sorry, Anita, it almost feels like in the order of things, 7.1.4 should come
yeah.
before 7.1.3, because actually the next step surely is to, we do some work on this balances form, we bring it back to you all, based on everybody's feedback tonight, and if that's agreed, that then goes out, we get that information in, as soon as we can, but it's going to go into the summer term, by the time it's all collated, and then following on from that, we seek to agree an option, because that's the scenario, isn't it?
Yeah, but
If all of the balances are committed, there's no option to apply.
governors will be meeting now and looking back at things. I think people want to steer on what they might want to think about committing in the next 12 months.
Hence, there is going to be a balances form. Forum has asked each school that's LA maintained to fill it out. So the feedback to heads and governors is, have a look at your balances, come up with a plan, and whether it's 1 year or 3 year, the detail comes through the form we bring back to you in March. But we've heard your feedback, so we want to work with you all on this.
Distribution 25-26.
I don't think we need to agree now.
Well, it says that in the minute,
Yeah.
in the recommendation. So at the moment, that's what I'm keeping on banging on about this. But at the moment, it's not very long away.
We're going to consult, we do need to do that fairly soon.
Yeah.
They'll have set
Thank
the
you.
financial year information, and then you're going to announce this, and they'll
Exactly.
have a chance to do
I
anything.
think we need to know.
We announce it.
I still think, and talking to the head here, I'd want to know roughly what the position on the reserve proposal would be, even if I knew that the forum had it in their gift to change that down the line.
But do you need to know, if you're at a primary, you know that you shouldn't have reserves over 8%. Full stop.
Yeah, but what
That's
if,
it,
what
step
if you've
five.
got significantly more?
Well,
At this
then
point,
you
you're
know,
told you're gonna lose them in a year.
without knowing what the penalty is, that you need to justify anything over 8% or 5%. You don't need to know what the penalty is.
Spend that.
Come up with a plan and share it with the local authority. That's essentially what the recommendation is.
Actually say no to whatever they want to spend money in. So they've got $1 million
Yeah.
and we've got a year and you're going to grab it at the end of the year. I mean, this for me, 25-26, what are you going to do? You're literally going to build something or
Yeah,
create something. You're not going
New
to.
carpet.
Well, yeah.
It's more expensive than that. But that's a really good point, Chris.
So I'm in the unhappy position of not having to make these decisions, I have to say. But am I to understand that there are no plans for any of these reserves? This round?
We don't know that.
No, but I mean,
No,
is
we're
that
gathering
not-
that information.
is that not how things work?
Yeah, so it's a good point, but individually, schools and obviously we've got heads and chairs that go around, they will say, yes, of course we do have plans. If the local authority wants to formally ask us through a pro forma to submit them, we'll tell you what they are. We'll bring a report back to you all summarising the information that we've got to say of the excess balances, 90% are committed, 10% aren't, for example. But we don't, that information's pretty much the other
My
side.
only point, and I think Amanda's got a fair point, we could just see people rushing out and doing silly things.
Hmm.
I don't think necessarily that would happen, but option three, the clawback, if you look down, it's nearly all zeros. It gives people a little bit of breathing space to think about the future.
It does.
Whereas none of the other options do. And if I was St Thomas More, for example, here, I'd be really worried because they may have committed huge amounts of that into capital and be looking at their people numbers position and be like, oh, hang on a minute, this is going to be really difficult for us if there's a suggestion that this could be option 1 or option 2 in a meeting in 3 or 4 months' time.
Yeah, I agree. So
I think that seems a little on there, at least we've got a plan that we can go to the DFE and say, we're drawing a line in the sand now. Here's the direction of travel, and it mitigates your 3-year thing, I think, Amanda, because nearly all of them are 0, apart from 3 schools. That's my story.
Does, and a lot of good governors' parties going on.
Well, not afford it.
Yeah, one fund. So, are there any other views on that? In terms of, and it's only a direction of travel in terms of option 3, that we are going to return to this in the summer meeting.
So are you going to go to, for example, the primary heads consultative and discuss this and go to whatever?
Probably there's
what
briefing,
sort of
Yes, I mean, I think
briefing, sorry.
we're getting around to a little bit here, aren't we? I think we're suggesting that 7.1.4 is the key recommendation.
Yeah.
We work on the 4 and we bring it back to the March forum. That's the key. And I think what the chair is suggesting that, obviously, I think following on from that recommendation is the right order. We do agree to an option 3 approach as a direction of travel, but that will need to be reviewed once you've all agreed about the 6th form, once we've rolled it out, once we've got all the feedback from all the schools and brought a report back to you, which takes you towards the end of the summer term, if not the start of the autumn term.
Do you have access to the academy's returns? Because that includes information on their returns and how they're going to spend it.
I think we've been down this route before, so yeah, I think
Let's not get into that.
but
That will complicate things.
yes, but the advice would be, you know, these are all state funded schools, we're all in this together. It'd be really helpful if academies also told us what their balance was and said they have plans to spend it, because then we're all seeping it together, but there's no compulsion to do so before.
It's submitted to the SFO, I didn't know whether you had access.
No, you can access it single academy trust at company's house. You can't for maths because the budget's way different. If people would like to share it, that'd be great.
Okay, are we happy with what Ian just said on 7.14 and 7.13? Yeah.
Can I just ask Anita, because actually I think we are coming from very individual positions here, and that's not a criticism, it's just a fact. Anita, what's your opinion on this direction of travel and routing it a bit further down the road?
Well, I think it's making it very clear to schools, governing bodies and heads as to, you know, it's option 3, so it's not immediate and it's not, you know, going for 8% and 5%. So I think it enables us to give a positive message as well to the DFE, SFA. So yeah, I'm
and we haven't agreed option 3. Option 3 will be a discussion when we've got more information.
Okay, great. And then 7.15, note the DSG deficits are currently ring-fenced from MNA's wider finances, and this has been extended for a period of 3 years up to March 2026, of affording short-term financial flexibility needed for authorities as they implement sustainable change independent of government's longer-term goals. Okay.
I'm not sure I really understand that.
So that's
In other words, once you go past that 3 years, if we were doing any clawing back.
no, that's about the DSG. This is about the DSG balance. So our 6.3 million is totally ring fenced. It's not a problem. It is a problem, but
It doesn't have to go on the council's balance sheet.
no, we don't have to show how we balance the books, including the deficit.
Is this the section 109 stuff we have?
Yeah.
So it includes the high needs block as well?
Yeah, this is absolutely. So it means that after March 2026, depending on the size of the deficit, councils have to show how they're going to cover that deficit.
It's an exemption that's existed for about the last 3 or 4 years. Okay.
Recommendation 7.1.4 is agreed.
Yeah.
7.1.3 will be agreed, subject to the form. And it's option 3 within 7.1.3.
At this moment in time, we're recommending option 3, but we'll review this based on the outcome of the information in 7.14 in June.
The outcome of the consultation.
In June, because I don't think it was done by March. But we can put it on the agenda if there's more information to come back to. Okay, that's painless actually.
Right. We can start that.
It's too late, we're moving on. Right, Julie, A7 high needs. please.
Thank you. It's the first of two papers that are intended to give more information about where we are with the high needs block and some reassurance and some comfort that the right activity is happening and we're moving in the right direction. So as Anita has already mentioned this evening, the current year forecast is an underspend of 606,000. Which obviously we need to, because we need to address that cumulative deficit we've got. The paper also gives a bit of an overview of what the money is currently paying for in terms of volume and different lines within the budget in terms of areas of spend. It also offers some reassurance about teachers paying pension grants and how that funding is going to be distributed, and just brings us back to something that was in today's minutes. So in the minutes at page 9, we had said that the top up for Kensington Queen's Mill from April 2024 would increase, and in paragraph 9.4 of the report, it was because of the discussion at forum at the last meeting was that we wanted to make sure that our special school could balance its budget, but we had flagged that the top up would only need to be 25,000 if the ESFA and the DFE didn't insist on this loan of 740,000 being repaid. We have to share with you that we've had some discussions with the DFE. We haven't had the answer that we'd like yet, so we're continuing that discussion. So it's important that we do increase the top up from April. So we're suggesting that it's actually 25,000 from April, and we bring the outcome of the conversation with the SFA back in the summer term, so we can tell you how far we've got with that, because we literally have only just met them last week. So it's taken that time just to open the conversation. So we want to revisit that particular benefit. The paper also says these are the things that the High Needs Review Group will look at in detail as we go through 2024. So we're going to want to look at the top-ups for the special resource provisions and the Kensington Queen's Mill, and on behalf of the forum we'll continue to look at how the £1 million grant funded from the DFE is impacting. Thank you.
Right.
Yeah, well, this is the first of two. So.
Yeah. Okay, any questions on A7?
I just have one question around, so part of our savings been a lesser reliance on the independent sector.
Absolutely.
That's fabulous. But we do still have reliance, and I also saw you negotiated quite robustly, shall we say, with those providers.
Yeah.
The issue is going to be, if everything goes up by 20%, is that going to release post the next election? Will that give us an even bigger incentive than not to want to go there? But sometimes we have no choice, do we? Is that going to really put a dent in our plans if that happens?
We'll continue the school by school negotiations, and we go to companies' house and we look at the balances they're holding, we look at their staffing structures, and we really sort of push back on that. And obviously when families are saying to us, we would like this school here, in law we're allowed to compare the cost of that with the cost of what provision we can make in our own maintained schools. And we do have the full backing of the 96 Education Act, when it's just simply a case of this is a very expensive school versus, and they can both do the job.
So they all become more expensive by 20%. In fact, you're still going to have that comparator then?
Yes, that will still be there. But what we're doing, because obviously what we're trying to do is develop such a good offer that even if parents are persuaded, the tribunal is persuaded. Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry, I was out of the room for a while. The DFE isn't agreeing that the £25,000 loan was free?
So we've just started the conversation with them.
Yeah.
And their initial response has been, well, it's for you to decide what the top up is. So we've gone back to them, pointing out some sections of the Heinisch funding guidance, and we're continuing the conversation. So what we're suggesting is we agreed at Forum that we'd have to increase it so their budget can be balanced. So we're suggesting let's go with 25,000 from April, and we'll bring a further update back to Forum in the summer term, because it's taken a long time to get them to the table. Yeah. So we're not just going to go away because they didn't agree the first conversation.
Provide evidence written on my notes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You agreed to look at the percentages of the inflation rate on the bands in our last meeting. What was the decision on that? And I think we've seen a little bit of a change in what we're getting, but because of current issues and how things have been managed there, we're not clear about whether there was a percentage rise or not, and what that is or how it's working.
So there hasn't been a percentage rise for since last June, but it's one of the things that we will review through the Heinisch review group. So we will have to take it through. It needs to be in the mainstream top ups as well. Yeah, we won't make any decisions without bringing it through Heinisch review group report.
Okay. And it was back there so we're getting quite far into this financial
We'll set
year.
out what it, what it currently is, what the proposal is, what the date of the change is. It's obviously also part of affordability as well. But yeah, we'll
I'm just aware that obviously we've had a really large increase for teaching assistants in the last year.
Yeah.
We've also got and the pension helped in that situation. But we've now got an cumulative problem going into the next year.
Yeah.
And there's also another pay settlement yet for. It's going to be quite. I think there's going to be some more catch up on that one, and so I think that we're going to end up with quite a difficult situation.
What we want to do, so we've put it on the forward plan for the Heinisch block review group. We want to have a kind of standard way of gathering the information so that we help everybody to give us what they need to tell us in order to look at that, make sure we've got the affordability and the read across, so that provisions that are catering for similar children are being treated in the same way.
Sorry, I've just got slightly lost. Is this for the educational banding tool outcomes?
As well, yes.
As well.
It's for the units.
Right.
And for the cash values attached to the banding. So we're
Right.
going to take all of that to Heinisch block review group, have a discussion there, and we will bring it back to a future meeting here. That's our
Right.
forward plan.
Thank you.
Okay. All okay? Any other questions? Okay, so we're asked to approve one thing for them, and that's the Heinisch block budgets for 24-25 plus that's out in paragraph 8 of the report. All in agreement? Yeah, and then to note, the Heinisch block forecast 11.2 and ESG cumulative deficit position, 11.3 the ongoing focus of grant funded activity, 11.4 the 24-25 funding for historic teachers paying pensions, contribution for special schools AP, hospital providers will total 316,000 and 24-25 additional ESG funding allocations will be 638,882 in section 7. 11.5 in relation to Kensington Queensmore Special School, the response from the DfE that Julie's just talked about regarding the implications of a loan repayment on the top of necessary increase necessary from April 2024. That's in paragraph 9.4. 11.6 the top-ups for mainstream schools, including capping of bands 8 to 10, and top-ups for the SRPs will be reviewed as per paragraph 9.3. And then finally, 11 to 7 the forward around the high needs block review group, and that lies quite a lot of things to note down everybody. Okay, item A8. Dedicated schools grant management plan, including DfE grant funded work streams.
So this is just a deeper dive into the grant activity to give you a bit more flesh on the bones of how that grant is being used, what's happening in each of the work streams, and also the deficit management plan that we mentioned in a number of places this evening. You've got the detail of what's in that plan now, and this is
the plan that we have just presented to the DFE as its latest iteration.
All okay, Peter?
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up a point that was made by Paul Cotter at the last Sports governing body just before Christmas. He felt that because the TAs have been reduced as a result of the TBT rebanding tool, he felt that there has been a significant deterioration in classroom learning environment, and was worried that this would lead to an increased number of suspensions and exclusions. Now, I know this is for a piece of paper for the DFE, but I just wonder whether that was the feeling of other primary heads, and whether we should be reflecting that the EBT tool, whilst I'm sure providing fair access to capital, had in fact reduced the amount of cash available for educational support in these circumstances, and that the classroom learning environment had deteriorated in certain classrooms.
But chip in briefly, if that's, I mean, obviously Paul, we kind of gives his time to share our high needs working groups. That may well be a discussion that we can take. That's the next review.
Well, I am concerned, possibly without reason. I am concerned that I have not seen a document from the centre, i.e. from yourselves, reflecting this tension at a classroom level as the amount of support gets reduced.
Well,
and should we be stating to the DFE that we've done this, but we've had some feedback from primary heads that the classroom the teaching environment has been reduced. Sorry, I can't think of the word.
Adversely affected is what you're saying.
Yeah.
What I wanted to reassure you was in the 2 work streams that we've set up, one of the work streams has put in place strategic inclusion practitioners, which we're calling SIPs. So we've got a SIP team now. They're out in schools alongside class teachers, looking at what is written in the child's plan in terms of what should be happening and what is happening in the classroom, and giving some advice and support on the interventions that should be there. So if they're seeing bucket time as part of attention autism, and they can make some suggestions on how that could be used in a slightly different way, how to refine it. That team is out there. It's a team of 4. And we're really lucky that we stole two of them from one of our schools that has an autism provision, and stole one of them from an equivalent provision in another local authority. So highly experienced practitioners who are out there to support teachers to deal with some of those things that I think you're saying are a concern. Are we meeting children's needs?
Paul started the governing body with a very strong statement, which I'm reflecting to you, about how he felt the CBT tool recalibration had affected the classroom teaching environment.
Let me reassure you that as part of the SIPS visit, what they're doing is they're rag rating what they're seeing. So red, amber, green. So they're looking at the plan, and if the plan says that the child must have 1, 2, and 3, what they're able to do is green, yes, absolutely, that's all happening. Amber, we need to make some changes here. We need to give some advice and support to the class teacher to make sure that that's there. And red, actually, this child is at risk of a suspension. What do we need to do differently? And then they're going back on those visits and re-ragging. And what I heard from the SIPs today is every amber they've been back on is now a green. So people are struggling. Paul's flagging a real concern, but what I want to reassure you is we've just got this team from the grant to be able to go in and put some practical support on the ground. It won't be enough to deal with all of the pressures, because we know that the nature of children's needs since COVID is a worry for us all.
Okay, thank you, Julie. We've got David, Jagdeep, and Amanda. David.
So I can answer your question. Jagdeep and I were both at the most recent consultative, and there were a large number of heads expressing concern.
Right.
Well, we need to go into that. Julie, you'll be presumably at the next heads meeting and can listen to some of those concerns with the.
And I think, and you'll know, I've said this before, there are national issues at play here on that, about the way in which the law works in relation to SEN, around funding or provision. You know, we're all working together, frankly, within those parameters. It's great that we've had a £1 million grant. We've spoken here several times before about what some schools would like it to be spent on and what it can be spent on. You know, there is some investment going in, but there are pressures and demands across the whole system. I mean, it's a national debate, isn't it? It's regularly spoken about in the House of the Parliament. And, you know, we would ask you to support us in lobbying for more support effectively for children, you know, with SEN. And we're all working within these parameters. We've had the £1 million grant, but I can't tell you how much time Julie and Anita have to spend with the DFE on the plan and this deficit recovery plan. It takes them away, frankly, from the work that they want to do, you know, with all of you and colleagues in the other borough as well. It's a huge amount of extra work, but it is a frustration. And I think, as you say, David, let's go back to having a conversation with heads, but please support us in lobbying for more funding or a change in the law, frankly.
I think you've all summed up really well, so I've not much else. We're squeezing the budget has an impact. £3 million less in schools has an impact, and you know, it's great. Those things are true. The what you're doing is having an impact. That's fantastic. But at the same time, we are able to do less for our children than we were able to do before. You give us money for an adult to work with a child, and we always usually used to provide them with more than you would give us, and that's what allows them to do really well. We can't. Our ability to do that is lessening day by day.
It's not just RBKC West, but it's every single local authority in the country, hence why there's a section 189 on, as we were talking before the meeting, on balances. It's because of the high needs block more than anything in every local authority, and bankrupt lots of local authorities. Any other questions on? Well, Amanda, you had your hand up.
It wasn't a question. The only positive, shall we say, to come out of all of this is I think all the schools have become a lot more creative with the way they use people, and I think people are used a lot better than they were. I think you said we had a lot more money 10 years ago. It wouldn't necessarily have been spent as well as it might have been now.
I've never spent money badly.
Do you know what I mean? It always used to be the thing that, you know, one child was
Sharp and practice.
got a TA. You don't necessarily have to have it. There are other ways of doing it. But of course, more would be better.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, everybody. Right, Schools Forum is asked to agree the draft deficit management plan in 711 and 712 agree. Do we all agree 711? Yeah. 712 agree that the deficit is not paid by the end of 26-27 due to the size of the cumulative deficit caused by increasing cost pressures, particularly in relation to the further years of statutory increase in Public 16 numbers, increased complexity of need and the expectation of parents. The in-year position is expected to be 0.78 million underspend repayment to DSE deficit of 26-27. In agreement? Yeah. Hands that. 703, just note the progress to date of the DBU grant of work at schools. Okay, moving on to A9, DSG update. Anita. Cheers.
I've realised that there should be an additional recommendation in the paper, which I'll raise now, so you've got time to think about it. So there should be a recommendation, so that there is a growth fund is agreed in accordance with the criteria that's set out in paragraph 4.7, and that will be a £60,000 growth fund. But it's taken account of all figures, but it's not a specific recommendation.
What would be the impact if we didn't put it through to the next one?
We have to put it in the APT to the DFE, so we can't delay that decision, unfortunately.
That's great. Yes.
Yeah.
Still
It's already, yeah.
We can miss it.
Well, we didn't have it last year, actually.
Yeah, well, we've got,
Yeah.
right, yeah.
It was missed last
It
year.
was missed in the paper, yeah. So that's probably why we haven't quite got the recommendation on it. Must do better. Yeah, just looking at table one, I'll just do a brief summary. So overall DSG is up by just over 2%, but you'll see the biggest increases in early years with the changes in the, which we'll come on to on the early years paper, with changes to the entitlements for children with families on specific benefits. But you'll see that the schools block has reduced by nearly £1 million. That's mainly because of a reduction of 233 pupils from last year. And then you've got the teachers' pay additional grants impact, where in the current year we've only got 7 months' worth, and then next year we've got obviously years' worth. And then if I go on quickly to the schools block and the adjustments we make there, so that's under paragraph 3.5. We start off with the total schools block funding in comparison to last year. Got the transfer to high needs. We can't have any fund for schools with falling roles because we're not meeting the new DFE requirements that we brought for previous forums. We're not showing an increase in numbers within the next 3 to 5 years. There's the proposed growth, 60,000, and Travellers Teachers funding, again, under the changes. That becomes a dedelegation recommendation. So that's how we get the total 83,219,000. And then the Appendix A is showing you the funding, running it through the DFE tool, shows funding for each school, subject to forum. These decisions are taken tonight, and then a DFE review of our tool that we have to submit. We've shown, we don't usually do this, but we thought for clarity, transparency, we've shown the notional SEN budgets that each school would have, so that we're publishing that clearly. It's in schools' budget notifications, but we've never put them all in an appendix. And then I probably don't need to go through the dedelegation proposals. They're all the same as previous years, other than adding the funding for Travellers children.
Any questions on data? Chris?
Yeah, just really not discussion here, obviously, but I have an interest in this, obviously regarding this in relation to traveller funding. I wonder if we could request again that we really look at the allocation of that funding. And to make sure that that what we're supposed to be getting, we're getting again, it's it will help regardless how to do. And just to when they're more equitably distributed.
Yes, that's a very good point. And my apologies that we haven't done that. So yes, we do need to, I guess it won't be, we need to put that review in place so that it's fully informed. We won't be able to do now for the following year, but yeah, thank you for, I apologise.
There will be evidence there, whatever the evidence shows.
Yeah.
So what's been the funding request? The money hasn't been.
Money covered, but it's the issue is about. I don't want to get too detailed about it, but there's supposed to be an outreach provision there, which I'm not sure we get. Most recent information that I've got is that school don't see that they're getting it, but that's not a criticism of that placeholder. I guess they're doing an awful lot in relation to Travellers, but we have to find 50% in order to fund our extra support. And there's an entire place on school. Now, I'm not suggesting that they're not doing brilliant job. I'd just like a review.
Yeah.
And we have discussed this over the last couple of years. It'd be nice.
Yes.
If we could do that.
And I'm sure that's one of the leader line, maybe Jane Robinson just could support that kind of process outside of forum.
Yeah.
We can talk about
Thanks.
Any other questions? So, I'm really sorry if I've missed it, but does the TPAG grant include an allowance for the 5% increase in
No, not yet. We're still waiting for the, but we've been assured, well, I think it'll be a similar calculation. But we haven't yet had the details yet, but yeah.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Forum is recommended to 711, agree the local funds formula use. It's free local funding. Agreed. Note the schools from confirmation of the agreements to transfer of 5 new schools block to Hynings block. 713, note the two banks to confirm April's term. Factors around pension. 714, agree the dedelegation of 103,000 for travellers children. 715, agree the dedelegation of 16,000 to cover trade union support. 716, confirm the dedelegation agreed at £200,000 to fund the reorganisation costs. Landscape for financing schools, that's for maintaining schools only. 717, confirm the dedelegation of 130,000 to fund the loss of the school intervention and brokering grant, use of statutory school improvement. And then a new one, 718, to agree the growth in line with guidance. Yeah, all in agreement? Okay, right, we're nearly there. Over 810, we've got food out and a raft list to talk about early years budgets.
1 minute longer than last year.
Okay, so this paper goes through the indicative early years budgets for 24-25. And the appendix details the methodology behind the proposed hourly rates provided. Jumping into the first table, the table on the first page, which sets out the initial allocations across the various funding streams, comparing the initial allocation for 24-25 to 23-24 where possible, because obviously some of the funding is new for 24-25. You will see that there is a net increase in the 24-25 indicative budget, the various streams, as well as the new entitlements that are being phased in from April. We'll get into that further down the report. Focusing on the bulk of the funding, which is obviously the 3 and 4 year olds, universal offer, that increased by 1.9% when compared to the 23-24 rate, including the earlier supplementary grant. As usual, these figures are indicative only and will receive revised figures in July 24 to take into account January 24 census, and then again another revision in the following year. So at the last spring budget, the government announced plans to reform to childcare to support parents to return and stay in work. The measures announced will expand the existing offer by funding up to 30 hours for children aged over 9 months with eligibility criteria. These reforms are all going to be phased over the next few years, and that's illustrated in section 2.4. Following the consultation in the summer by the DfE, they confirmed that the 5% retention can be applied to each of the 4 funding streams now, whereas previously it was only 3 and 4 year olds. The DfE did also confirm that they intend to increase the pass-through rate from 95% to 97% once the new entitlements are fully embedded, but the timeline for that hasn't been. I know, Jack, I'm looking at Jack because he's not about this already.
You've answered my question.
I think the idea is that because we will receive more funding for the younger age groups, they can then reduce obviously that percentage. Obviously, our concern locally is that the take up of 30 hours is not as high as it is in other London local authorities. So we have to keep an eye on that.
So the full calculations behind the hourly pass-through rates can be found in Appendix A, and they're summarised in section 3.8. As usual, after setting aside budgets for deprivation, the SEN inclusion fund and contingency funding on the 95% hourly pass-through rate has been calculated at £7.47 for 3 and 4 year olds. So it's an increase of about 20p to the comparative 23-24 rate, including the UISG. The rate make a difference. The rate for 2-year-olds and we calculated £9.98, and for 9 months to 2 years, it will be £13.60 when that kicks in from September. As usual, the budgets for early, the pupil premium, disability access fund, and the maintained nursery supplements are ring fenced, so excluded from these hourly rate calculations. But it is worth noting in section 3.9, the increase in the maintained nursery supplement hourly rates of £1.30. Section 4 of the report is just what we know so far about the wraparound childcare programme at the moment. And that Kensington and Chelsea is an early adopter of the programme. It's all in planning stage at the moment, and we don't know much more, but we will bring it to the forum.
Any questions?
Just on the pass-through rate, you said it's going to move to 97% at some point.
Yeah.
How would that work and when?
We don't know when. In terms of how it will work, we think from the webinars we have been to, it will be the same sort of criteria that they'll apply. It will just be that instead of 5%, we'll be able to retain 3%.
Okay.
It'll be on the same. We've been told it'll be on the same funding streams.
Because I was going to ask what we're going to do with the 1.2 million of you pay.
Shouldn't be that much.
Well, we would never cheat when there to get funding, as you know, but we always give it back.
There'd be lots of Rackliffs. You get to clone a Rackliff and afford several of them as well.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, great, fantastic. Right, so forum asked to note items points 5.1, 5.2 and 5.3 in regard to what Prelims just been through it, but to agree 5.4, agree the hourly rates to be paid to providers of early years childcare and education 24-25 as set out in Appendix A. All in agreement? Fantastic, thank you. Finally, any other business? No, brilliant. That concludes this meeting of the schools forum. Thanks, everyone.
Only black and white.
I know. Well, I think that's pretty good as well.
That's a few minutes, but say.
Well done.
Thank you.
The last two episodes really early.
Yeah, we were hoping about it.